Before the F-16, America's best aggressor was the small, agile F-5. A dangerous opponent, it was the standard against which the US Air Force and Navy tested their best pilots and aircraft for years. From the A-model Freedom Fighter to the Tiger II, which emerged in the early 1970s, the F-5 has had an impressive yet often overlooked career. It served in Vietnam, starred in Top Gun, and was even captured by the North Vietnamese and subsequently evaluated by the Soviets. Yet its definitive roles were as an export fighter and an aggressor at home, which led to its actual combat ability being misunderstood. In reality, the F-5 was, for a period of time, arguably one of the most capable lightweight dogfighters of its era.
At the start of the Cold War, the US military faced the challenge of equipping allies. During and immediately after the Korean War, the Soviets continued to evolve the MiG-15 platform. Newer aircraft followed, using similar logic, the MiG-17 and 19. The core issue was proliferation. The MiG platform was being sold across the Eastern Bloc, and while the US had its own counter, other Allied nations did not. In Korea, the F-86 had been the first check on the MiG-15's dominance, but it was a close fight. In most variants of the Sabre, the only notable advantage was pilot training. The Sabre was later offered to Allied militaries, but the same issue persisted. The American solution to the MiG was to build faster, larger platforms, relying on radar and missile tech, with the expected outcome of locating, shooting, and winning before ever merging. This would be balanced by a focus on raw power, allowing pilots to simply blow through or use the vertical to their advantage. Yet the problem remained. Newer systems were both technologically sensitive for export and very expensive. What was needed was something cheap, agile, and reliable. In late 1953, NATO had outlined similar deficiencies specifically for Western Europe, namely the need for small, cheap fighters that were easy to maintain and could deliver nuclear weapons if necessary. The NATO Basic Military Requirement 1, or NBMR-1, was detailed in response, outlining the need for a lightweight strike fighter. At the time, Edgar Schmood, who had played a role in designing the Mustang, Sabre, and Super Sabre at North American, had moved to Northrop in late 1952 and had assembled a team there. In 1954, Schmood sent the team to Europe to review the NBMR-1, then to Asia. Both the MiG threat in the East and NATO's own problems had several points of overlap: cost, reliability, availability, ease of use, and size. With a loose vision in mind, the Northrop team got to work on a privately funded venture. Crucially, the Northrop team aimed for simplicity. By the late 50s, this was quite uncommon for a US concept. From the Phantom to the Vigilante, rapid technological breakthroughs had shifted the focus from pure outward performance to the capabilities of internal systems. Computer-assisted bombing, internal navigation, radar-assisted ranging, and so on. The Northrop design would have little to none of that. Instead, it would be, in essence, a classic dogfighter made for close-in knife fights. The Northrop team's vision was somewhat controversial. Unlike the rest of the industry, they foresaw the limitations of high-cost platforms. Both Allied nations and the US itself would benefit from a low-cost platform, one that wouldn't necessarily be at the cutting edge, but would be both reliable and capable. In March 1955, the first concepts were drawn up, thanks in large part to the arrival of the new J-85 engine. Originally designed for the Quail decoy, it was smaller than the J-79, with a better thrust-to-weight ratio and greater reliability, perfect for a small airframe. Over the following 12 months, the team drew up several ambitious but retrospectively unnecessary proposals, ranging from the PD-2706 for carrier use to the N-156TX, featuring podded underwing engines and a two-man crew, technically the first official concept of the aircraft. By early 1956, the N-156 concept had been developed into something more realistic: the Tango, a twin-seat trainer, and the Foxtrot, a single-seat fighter. From January through March that year, the design was refined through several iterations, lengthening the fuselage, reshaping the tail and wings, and crucially, placing the engines inside the fuselage to improve performance. By July, the US Air Force had selected the N-156T for development as a trainer, and by December, its core design had been refined into something familiar to us today, designated PD-2879D.
By 1958, a prototype for the trainer version, the YT-38 Talon, was under development. As for the fighter, it was a different story. Little interest had been shown, it remained privately funded, and the team were beginning to consider it a failure. Yet, eventually, the aircraft would still have a chance to prove itself when an order for a working prototype was placed, ostensibly to compete as an export fighter under the Military Assistance Program.
On July 30th, 1959, test pilot Lou Nelson took the N-156F into the air for the first time at Edwards Air Force Base. The aircraft performed exceptionally well, validating the lightweight fighter concept and demonstrating supersonic capability early in testing. By January 1960, a second prototype was flying, this time with simulated weapons loadouts, and it showed similarly impressive performance. By 1961, the US Army had requested a review of the 156 as a potential platform for Army aviation. Yet it wouldn't be until April the following year that serious attention would come its way. Suddenly, in April 1962, the Kennedy administration selected the 156F as the basis for a new, low-cost export fighter under a new push for mutual allied assistance, the Freedom Fighter. It was, by definition, the perfect fit, exactly what the team had envisioned. Low-cost, reliable, agile, and stripped of sensitive components. In rapid succession, the early engines were replaced with afterburning J-85 GE5s, boosting thrust to roughly 3,000 pounds in afterburner. Fly-offs were conducted, this time designated as the YF-5A. The results were impressive. Against larger designs like the Super Sabre, the Freedom Fighter could deliver a smaller payload with the same accuracy, while in air-to-air, it was basically unrivaled in agility. Against its competitors in the export program, like the stripped-down F-104H, it was an easy win. Fast, agile, cheap to build, easy to repair, and light. In its initial production form, it wouldn't have a radar, nor an INS, nor much else. Yet, in the right hands, it was deadly. Further upgrades were finalized, including a new J-85 GE13 engine, which provided just over 4,000 pounds of thrust each with afterburner. By 1964, the F-5 Freedom Fighter was ready. Cheap, deadly, and simple, as the team predicted in the early 50s, defense gaps in Asia and Europe were the first to be filled by it. In the decades that followed, sales would expand to South America, the Middle East, and Africa. In fact, over time, it would serve with more than 30 different militaries. Yet at its market debut, there was hesitation. To address this, Northrop wanted the aircraft to be combat tested and properly evaluated to prove it worked. Under a rapid modification program, a variety of new systems, including a refueling probe and a lead computing gunsight, would be installed, creating the F-5C. In October 1965, it would be sent to Vietnam. In what the US Air Force called Scotia Tiger, or Little Tiger, the aircraft was evaluated as an interdiction, strike, and air-to-air platform, everything export customers would want. Over the course of around 2,600 sorties, the program deemed that, at least between 1965 and 66, the F-5 was probably the most survivable strike aircraft in the war. Small and fast, it was difficult to spot and track. On station, pilots recalled great accuracy, especially with the favoured M117s. While back at base, turnover times were unmatched. Engine changes could be done in record time, and maintenance itself was easy. In fact, by 1966, the program noted only two major deficiencies: payload, which planes such as the Phantom did better, and range. While the F-5 was replaced in its roles by the Phantom and Corsair, Scotia Tiger proved the platform's effectiveness, and sales quickly followed. With lessons learned, further upgrades took place. Since its inception, the F-5 team had believed that successive upgrades and overhauls were the solution to air forces buying completely new platforms. The first major result of this was the F-5E Tiger II, developed between 1970 and 1972. With a widened airframe, newer internal systems, including a new radar and leading-edge route extensions, it was superior in most respects to the Freedom Fighter. What the Tiger II did was quite smart. Without a complete reset, the same affordable, reliable design had been upgraded into a budget air superiority fighter. And just like the Freedom Fighter, it began to sell. Just how effective the design was would be exemplified by a Soviet evaluation team. In 1975, following the Vietnam War, a captured F-5E was sent to Russia for testing. It went up against a variety of MiGs, including the MiG-21, in a number of configurations and at different speed envelopes. While the fishbed, with its delta wing shaping, had great instantaneous turn ability, energy retention proved to be a strong suit of the F-5. While reported details on the tests seemed to vary, the general consensus was that at high speeds at low altitude, the fishbed could outturn the Tiger. However, at lower speeds or higher altitudes, the F-5 held a distinct advantage. At some altitudes, the MiG retained better acceleration, and overall it remained the better interceptor, with much better speed and a higher service ceiling. However, the threat posed by the F-5 was undeniable. Ironically, although not directly mentioned, fishbed pilots faced a similar dilemma to that of phantom pilots fighting fishbeds in Vietnam. Specifically, without an edge at low speeds, the best approach was to retain energy and pull the fight into the vertical, where the MiG could hold the advantage. With newer sidewinders with wider envelopes, the F-5 could also deny the MiG's ability to extend once merged, and without this ability to add speed and separation, the F-5 would maintain the turn rate advantage. Beyond raw agility, the F-5 had a cleaner cockpit, with everything pushed forward into the pilot's direct or peripheral vision, and no thick canopy frame around the optical gun sight, giving better visibility than the fishbed. In a clean configuration, the F-5 was also remarkably difficult to spot, especially from the front. The Tiger's new leading-edge route extensions offered features that would define fourth-gen fighters: better lift at high angles of attack and better sustained turn rates. These advantages were later proven in combat. During the 1977 Ogaden War between Ethiopia and Somalia, the Ethiopians effectively employed the F-5E against a variety of Somali MiG-21s. While pilots had the advantage of American training and AIM-9Bs, the outcomes were distinct, similarly matched overall to the MiG-21, but with a distinct advantage close in, especially when slow. Against MiG-19s, it also fared well. In 1975, the F-5 began serving as an aggressor. In a manner similar to Soviet evaluations, fly-offs in the States proved the aircraft was almost unmatched in a close-in fight until the air combat evaluation trials against new fourth-gen fighters. Even then, it was reported to have been a close fight. Even in the fourth generation of fighters, the F-5 left quite a legacy. The design philosophy, from high angle of attack performance and sustained energy to the viability of the Air Force fielding low-cost supplementary fighters, directly led to the F-16. Likewise, internally at Northrop, the F-5 would be used as the basis for the YF-17 Cobra. The same general shaping was used, albeit after thorough overhauls, including a similar wing shape, a similar leading-edge sweep, no trailing-edge sweep, and massive leading-edge extensions. In fact, even the initial YJ-101 engines were derived, if traced back far enough, from the J-85. It's interesting to note that, in retrospect, this means that not only did the F-5 dominate as a knife fighter in its own time, but amongst fourth-generation fighters, its spiritual descendants did as well. The Viper, as a rate fighter, and the Hornet, in the one circle and with nose authority.
What Northrop built with the F-5 was something special. It was not technologically advanced. In fact, it was, by definition, a simple aircraft. What's more, a core design principle was longevity. The Northrop team wanted something that would last, and it did. While it wasn't absolutely unmatched, in most cases it was, more or less, the best dogfighter of its time. A title it later passed on to the F-16, a design whose core principles the F-5 itself validated. Put it another way, the F-5 was simple but great. So great that the legacy it left is hard to quantify.
Thanks for watching. Our videos are researched, written and produced by a small team of filmmakers dedicated to bringing you accurate military aviation history from around the world. Please consider supporting us by joining our merch and members site for early access, bonus content and merch discounts. Or become a YouTube channel member for early access, or simply hit subscribe. Your support means everything.